Good day, everyone. This is Mike Fitz, your resident naturalist with Explore.org, the world's largest live nature cam network. This is a bear cam play-by-play broadcast. During the next hour, I'll narrate the bear and salmon activity that we see at Brooks River in Katmai National Park, Alaska. This is a live broadcast, so we don't know what we're going to see, but hopefully we'll find some interesting bear activity to talk about on the cams this afternoon. I will be toggling through different views of the river. I have many different cameras at my disposal. I am my own producer for this broadcast, so I will be pausing from time to time as I gather my thoughts, look at some of the other camera feeds, and decide which camera to go to next. I also have a couple of wonderful camera operators working behind the scenes, logged into the camera controls, and they are scanning the river, looking for interesting sights for me to share with you. So I thank them in advance for all their hard work. So we'll be taking, of course, a look at world-famous Brooks Falls. We'll also be going downriver, perhaps from time to time, to see what's happening at the riffles. We have cameras at the mouth of the river as well, so we'll be transferring downstream, about a half-mile downstream or so, to look at those and even maybe jump underwater to see what the salmon happen to be doing. I know there's a bit of algae growing on the lens, but we still get some good views of the sockeye salmon that are in the mouth of Brooks River right now. Before I get started with the main broadcast, I do want to remind everybody to please join the Community Science Project that we have set up on Explore.org. So if you are logged in to make comments through Explore.org or a community member, and you take a screenshot using the snapshot tool, please count the number of bears that you see in your snapshot, click the Community Science button. It'll take you to another window where you have to answer a few short questions, but that will greatly help us to keep track of the bear activity at Brooks River. So I appreciate your input with that. And if you have questions that you want answered in advance for any of these broadcasts, or maybe during the text chats that myself and rangers host periodically, please fill out the Bear Cam question form. Go to the bottom of the page below the live camera feed, look for the More Info tab, and you can find a link to that form. So Brooks River is one of the most famous places in the world, one of the best places in the world to watch brown bears fishing for salmon. But just where is this place? In case you're a new viewer, new to the bear cams, tuning in recently, you're wondering where we are, Brooks River is in a remote part of Alaska. It's actually on the Alaska Peninsula, about 300 miles southwest of Anchorage. And at lower left, you can see Brooks Camp. That's where Brooks River is. You can't get there by driving. You must take a boat or plane. And Brooks River itself is only about 1.5 miles long, so it's a very short river, and in many ways somewhat unremarkable physically compared to a lot of the places within Katmai, one of the wildest landscapes remaining in North America. But it is an extremely important place ecologically and historically as well. Along the river, there are several different webcams. So two near Brooks Falls. The main Brooks Falls cam is live right now. About 100 yards downstream is the Riffles camera. And then down at the river mouth, we have those 3 other cameras that are live right now. So 2 above the water, looking at different parts of the river. Lower River Bear Cam looking more towards the mouth of Brooks River. And then we have River Watch, which is pointed generally upstream. So a lot of stuff to get to take a look at today. Perhaps we should get started with what's happening up at Brooks Falls. And I know our camera operator was giving me a hint that she was headed to the far pool to check out some of the bears there. It's been a very wet day in Katmai, as you probably can see on the cams. So seeing those bears in the far pool isn't necessarily the easiest today. The light is just really, really dim. We've had mostly adult males fishing in that corner this morning and this afternoon. Seems like most of them have taken a bit of a reprieve, although there is one just a little bit downstream. One of those big males that we were watching in the falls earlier actually looks like he's at the riffles right now, walking through this area. So this looks like, and I'm not 100% sure of this ID, but this could be number 474. He's a large adult male. He's first identified in 2013, I believe, 2013 or 2014. So he's a mature adult right now, certainly in his teens. There's a lot of salmon available in the water right there. You can see them just scattering as he moves on through. And you can tell that he was not trying very hard to fish. So that indicates that he's a fairly well-fed bear. He doesn't necessarily want to work very hard for salmon that might put up a struggle. This is not an uncommon behavior for bears at this time of the year, moving through the river looking for anything that really just can't swim away. And as he walks out of sight, let me bring up a photo here of 474. Give you a better look at what his face looks like. I recognize him by sort of his grizzled brown fur. It's especially grizzled sort of in his shoulder area. He also has short round ears. So there's another couple of ways that I am identifying him. His eyes are fairly wide set, and that's in contrast to some of the other big dark bears that we see at Brooks Falls at this time of the year, especially number 32, which he can sometimes be confused with. Now, 474 has moved out of the riffles area, but it looks like there's another bear moving through right now, and that happens to be a young juvenile bear. So this is a bear that's only a few years old, I think, based on the scar that I got a glimpse of on its right hip. If it turns, we'll get a better look at that. But this could be number 821, which was a spring cub in 2013. So this is a fairly young bear, still what we would consider a sub-adult. And there's a good look at that scar. One of the ways that you can identify bears is not only by their facial features, their coat colors, their claw colors, but also by any scars and wounds that they may have. Those are good identification characteristics for, a month, 2 months, maybe perhaps a whole summer. But eventually those scars, heal, the wounds heal, so they can't be used, unless they're very large and deep, they can't be used necessarily reliably from year to year. But 821 does have that little scar on his right hip. And again, he's a sub-adult bear, so that means he's independent of his mother, but not fully mature, and still learning how to survive in the bear world. Of course, bears have learned many lessons by tagging along with their mother. And 821 was a bear that we believe was raised along Brooks River by a female that comes here in July and sometimes in September, and that's number 504. But once they're independent of their mother, they still have to figure a lot of things out. Mother was their defender, their teacher, their guardian, and their provider. And then all of a sudden, come springtime, around the beginning of their third or fourth summer, they're separated from mother. Sometimes mother drives these young bears away. Often it's the presence of an adult male that takes an interest in mom because she is returning to the beginning of her reproductive cycle and is becoming more interested in mating, and male bears can smell that. So those young bears that are tagging along with mom all of a sudden are like, hey, I don't want to be in this area. So they have to quickly find their way in the world on their own, establish their own home range. And that can take several years for brown bears to do that. 821, of course, is moving up towards the falls. And right now we do have 3 bears at Brooks Falls. It looks like it's difficult to say because he's so dark. Maybe we'll probably get a better look at him later on in the broadcast, but it looks like in the jacuzzi is number 856 or number 68. When it's so dark like this and so dim, it's difficult to tell them apart. When I get a better look at their face, that'll, I think, help me to differentiate between the two. If it is 856, he is the most dominant bear river at this that we've seen really consistently over the last decade. He had a little bit of a hiccup in his place in the hierarchy in 2017 due to some injuries, but he's actually regained his top rank as the most dominant bear at Brooks River. So when he moves through the river, he definitely commands respect. This is 856, a photo I took of him last year, almost to the day. So that gives you a relatively good idea of what he looks like out of the water. A very powerful animal, very strong animal, very assertive as well and bold. And he certainly commands a lot of respect from all the other bears. When you're a young bear like 821, this is 821 who's moved back up towards Brooks Falls. When you're a young bear like 821, you really do have to be cautious in your approach to Brooks Falls because those adult males aren't necessarily going to be tolerant of your presence or any of the adult females either. So we often see these young bears, these subadult bears, hovering on the fringes of the waterfall, looking to scavenge any leftovers that the adult bears leave behind. They're certainly prone to keep their distance, although we have seen instances where subadult bears will march right up to the waterfall, sometimes when they're feeling bold or well-fed, or they determine that for whatever reason, those other bears at the falls aren't going to give them a hard time. And on days when the adult males and the adult females that regularly use Brooks Falls are well fed, they find opportunities at the falls that perhaps wouldn't otherwise be available to them. So they'll move up to the waterfall. They'll try fishing in some of those more preferred fishing spots like the jacuzzi or the lip or the fall pool, and those are very valuable learning opportunities for them. I'm also convinced, though, that bears learn by watching. Because, for example, we were looking at 856 in the far pool before. And mother bears really don't take their cubs we were looking at 856 in the jacuzzi before. And mother bears really don't take their cubs into the jacuzzi. There's only really one, maybe 2 females that occasionally go into the jacuzzi as adults, sometimes with their cubs. But most of the time, those females avoid that spot. They just don't know how to fish there. Maybe they're not big enough to fish there. But when these young bears are hanging around the fringes of the falls, they see these bears doing things in the jacuzzi, in the far pool, on the lip. And I think they're quite smart enough to put 2 and 2 together, and they say, hey, maybe when that spot is open, if I go there, I can test my skills in these locations because I can see that bear is getting food, and I want that food when the opportunity is there. So again, bears are very smart, very opportunistic. One of the things that I love watching about these young bears is how they adapt to and cope with different situations and learn to make a living in the world. Right, and just for the moment, we're going to go downstream. I know, our camera operators are also looking for bears in this vicinity. Over the past few days, we've started to see more and more bears using the lower half of Brooks River, at least on the cameras. There could be certainly more bears using this river than this part of the river than what we see. It's a lot easier to just see bears up at the falls because the line of sight there is better. But the camera, with all the different eddies and side channels that happen that are contained within the lower Brooks River and all the tall grass, it sometimes can be difficult to see some of these bears down here. But bears are moving through this area looking for dead and dying salmon. So again, you don't need to be up at the falls to make a living at this time of the year. Certainly, there's plenty of food available for bears down at the mouth of Brooks River. And the mouth of Brooks River actually becomes the most productive place for bears to fish as when you want to consider a catch rate goes at this time of the year. So you're really not going to be feasting on live salmon at the mouth of Brooks River. You're mostly going to be looking for dead and dying salmon. But that difference between a live salmon and a dead and dying salmon could be why, again, we're seeing these big adult males continue to fish up at Brooks Falls. And again, I'm still not sure if it's 856 or 68 in the jacuzzi. I'd like to get a better look at him at some point. We definitely have another mature adult male on the lip of the waterfall. This is now number 151. Very healthy looking bear at this time of the year. Here's a 151 last year. He has wide set pointy ears, a very tapered and pointed muzzle, often very dark colored in the fall, dark brown, especially on a day like today when everything is soaked. So 151 has been making a good living at the falls over the past couple of weeks or so. On the lip especially, he's been fairly selective. And when he catches the salmon in his mouth, he's not eating each fish. He seems to evaluate that fish. Maybe we'll get a chance to see that in action. And what he's selecting for, I'm not sure. I don't know if it's for a fresher fish, if he's looking for one that just hasn't spawned yet, maybe if it's a female with eggs. And he could be looking for just females. Because if you are a bear and you're looking to maximize your intake of calories, you want to eat salmon eggs because they are just so rich in calories. I'm wondering right now, however, if 151 is just being sitting back from the edge of the lip because he doesn't want to get too close to the bear that's in the jacuzzi. He probably understands that, being on the lip of the waterfall, he has a lot of options to escape if the larger, more dominant bear in the jacuzzi decides to approach him. But still, I think a lot of times bears can't get over sort of like that tentativeness that they might be feeling within them, or any sort of apprehension or nervousness, whatever that equivalent emotion would be in bears. I'm sure that they must feel that on occasion when they are competing with other bears for space at Brooks Falls. You often see them come down. Especially bears that are unfamiliar with the location, they'll be salivating very heavily, foaming around the mouth, and that's an indication of stress. You'll see them yawning from time to time. That's also an indication of stress. So is there they're able to learn to fish at the falls. They're able to learn what individuals they're dealing with. I think that stress level probably decreases, but it's probably always there at a certain level. All right, and as I take a look and see what else is happening around the river, another look at 151. Of course, these bears are looking for a variety of opportunities to fish for salmon. The main species that is in the river spawning right now happens to be sockeye salmon. Not the best look at a sockeye right now, just a little bit dim with the light and with the algae. But spawning sockeye salmon are just absolutely gorgeous animals. Bright red backs, greenish heads. After they spawn and die, though, it's not they're not exactly the prettiest of fish. But this is a typical scene in Brooks River right now. This is not live footage. This is something I had pre-recorded before using my little point and shoot underwater camera. But the salmon are very busy spawning right now. This is the end of their life cycle. So salmon are anadromous, meaning they will go to freshwater, or they're born in freshwater. They go to the ocean to grow big. They come back in the freshwater to spawn, and then another part of their life history is that they are semelparous, which means they die after they reproduce. So they only have one shot at this, really. And the fish that are upstream, towards the riffles, they are pairing up, trying to find good nesting sites if you're a female. Males are trying to find access to females. These fish that we're looking at the mouth of Brooks River are just waiting for the right time to spawn. And that's a common question that I see in the comments on the bear cam, is what are these fish doing at the mouth of Brooks River on the underwater camera? Are they waiting to spawn? When will they spawn? Have they already spawned? And these are fish that are just waiting for the right time to spawn. So they'll move upstream over the next several weeks or so. The peak of the spawning activity at Brooks River happens at this time of the year. So in the water right now, much of the river is just filled with fish. It's hard to see just because of the camera angles themselves. Maybe the best opportunity for us to get a look at what the spawning salmon are doing right now is just to go back to the riffles. And this camera is just about 100 yards downstream of Brooks Falls. So the well-oxygenated water here, the gravel, small to medium-sized gravel, is a good substrate for the salmon to dig their nests and bury their eggs. And when the lighting is right and you have maybe a better view from the riffles platform in the riffles cam, you can see that the river is just really filled with with rubies all over the place, pairs of them or sometimes groups of them, single fish. You know, the few fish that we're seeing on the screen right now, these are ones that are in the act of course, digging their nests and defending their nesting site. You can often tell, you know, how far along in the process they are by looking at how worn the body of the fish actually is. If you don't see any sort of like yellow patches, that means that the salmon probably hasn't done a whole lot of spawning work. But if you start to see, you know, yellow patches on them, very worn looking tails, then that's a good indication that that fish has been up in the river for a while, working very hard to spawn. Females don't have any tools really to dig their to dig their nest with, except for their tail. And so they sacrifice so much in order to reproduce. They're determined animals. They demonstrate a tremendous amount of endurance. They don't eat once they re-enter fresh water, so their migration and spawning is entirely fueled just by the energy reserves that they have in their body. They're really just a remarkable fish overall. Like I mentioned before, though, they are spawning and they are dying. So this is the time of the year where they only have, you know, maybe a few weeks left. For the salmon that are, a lot of salmon that are in the water right now that have finished spawning, they may only have a matter of days at most to survive. So once you spawn, you really don't have very much time at all to survive. Salmon, of course, end up expending a tremendous amount of energy in this spawning process. And that means when a bear scavenges a dead or dying fish, it's not actually getting as much or as many calories out of the fish as it would if it were to, when that fish was, you know, fresh from the ocean. And I think that's a good indication of why we are still seeing bears up at the falls looking for these fresher fish. Because the fish that have not yet spawned, they could contain twice the amount of calories compared to a fish that has already spawned. And a lot of the fish that are being caught up at the falls right now are not sockeye salmon, they're silver salmon, often called cohos. They're bigger than sockeyes. They arrive a little bit later in the year than sockeyes. They generally arrive in August. So if you are a bear like this one right here, looking to maximize, again, your calorie intake, then you want the fresher fish, as many of those fresh fish as possible. Now that I'm getting a better look at this fish too, or this bear too, I think this might be number 68, not 856 like I had said before. But again, still very dark. It's hard to tell. Maybe if we get some brighter light with the sun peeking through the clouds there, we can tell. So number 68 is still a bit of a mystery bear to a lot of us. He is a mature adult in his mid-teens right now. And for a long time, he was just identified as a bear that we would see at Brooks Falls or at Brooks River in late summer and autumn. But over the past couple of years, there's been one bear at Brooks Falls in July who the bear monitoring staff, the staff at Brooks River who keep track of the bears, take photographs of them, note their movements along the river as part of a long-term monitoring study that the park undertakes, identified a bear, number 603. And when I started to take a very close look at a bear that looked like 603 this year, I know some of the Bear Camp fans have suspected this for a number of years, but I got a good opportunity to watch him last July in person for a number of days. And I'm fairly convinced that this is the same bear. So this is number 68/603 in July. He came down to Brooks River. He was a very dominant bear at the time. We saw him challenging other bears regularly. He got in one very intense fight with the river's largest bear, number 747, and defeated 747 in that fight. So he's a very dominant bear overall. And the only bear that he really yields to is number 856. And even then, he doesn't yield to 856 as readily as all the other bears, really. Even 747, who is a real giant, yields to 856, doesn't even think about challenging him. And we haven't seen 68 challenge 856 really this year, but I'm curious to know how that'll play out next year, because 68 tends to walk away from 856. He tends to stand his ground when 856 approaches him and let 856 do his thing before 856 just says, okay, it's done, I'm going to break off the encounter. But 68 is a few years younger than 856. 856 getting up there in age. He's approaching 20 years old, and he's been dominant at the river for almost a decade now, which is a long time to maintain your dominance. I mean, it's a rough life at the top. So I'm very curious to see how this hierarchy shakes out. As these bears age and mature. I'm going to type a quick note to our camera operators here. Looks like we're already going to where I thought we might go anyway. It looks like, again, very dark today, so difficult to identify bears on the cams, but it looks like we could have number 503 here. Sitting in the rocks, he licks his lips a lot. He's when he's out of the water, he's a very tall bear. He's not really well filled in, and that's just because he's not a fully grown adult. But he has a really big frame. Long and lanky. You see him walking towards that it looks like maybe number 32, who is hiding in the shadows there in the far pool. Again, 503's ears just kind of peeking up above the rocks on the far side there. 503 was born in 2013. He has a very unique life history. He was emancipated, separated from his mother in 2014, but then he was as a yearling, but then he was adopted by number 435 Holly, who kept him through the rest of that summer and another summer. So I enjoy watching his story of growth and learning and maturation. He's currently a fairly tolerant bear of other bears, very playful. I'm curious to know whether or not that will change as he becomes a more mature adult and his priorities shift. And he still has a lot of growing to do. Again, born in 2013, I mean, he's not that old. Usually, male brown bears don't reach their full size until they're, as far as like length and height goes, until they're 9-10 years old. Their skulls too really don't reach their within a few percentage points of their maximum width until they're 9-10 years old or so. But even after that, they continue to gain mass just because they are so big and there's so much food available for them in this ecosystem. So we could certainly see 503 continue to grow for another 5, 6, 7 or more years. So he has I think just because he is so big right now, I think he has the potential to be a very large brown bear. This is another look, a more clear view of 503. This is a photograph of him from last year. He doesn't really have those scars on his hip anymore, but beautiful bear. Again, licks his lips a lot. One of those characteristics that you can look for. Very tall, but growing rapidly. So his body shape is going to change, and you may not be able to use that as an identification feature next year even, or the year after. So as he starts to fill in very quickly. On the, behind A56 here, let's go back to that falls view for a moment. Excuse me, yeah, behind 503, we haven't really got a good look at him. He's been hiding in the shadows, very dark today overall, but I think what we have, the bear on the very far pool over there, is number 32, Chunk. This is Chunk from July. He has narrow set eyes, very prominent brow ridge. This time of the year, he's much, much darker than he is in July. So overall, a very beautiful bear. Got that nickname Chunk when he was a 2.5-year-old. He was just even a chunky bear then, but he's a very fat bear at this time of the year. You can see that the difference in their coat colors from spring to fall can be quite dramatic. So number 32 right now, dark in color, dark fur, dark brown fur. He'll have that same fur when he comes out of the den next year and into early summer, because bears shed their fur. They really go through their shedding and molting cycle in midsummer. But for whatever reason, and I'm not sure why, their fur tends to lighten over their wintertime hibernation. I don't know what it is, but bears tend to come out of the den just a little bit lighter than they do when they were in the den. Maybe it's more or less just getting bleached by the sun when they happen to come out in the springtime. So over those, there's several weeks before we see them at Brooks Falls, but after they've exited the den, their coats could lighten at that time. But when their new coat grows in for the fall, it tends to be much, much darker than what it is in the early summer. Each one of these bears is not, finding a lot of success, at least during this broadcast. You can tell overall that these are healthy bears or well-fed bears. They're all carrying, some substantial fat reserves. I've not seen a bear on the cameras this year that really looks like it's lacking for food at this time of the year. So they're all doing fairly well. I mean, the number of fish in the watershed is extremely high. The Naknek River watershed, which Brooks River is a part of, experienced one of its highest escapements ever this past summer for sockeye salmon. And when I'm talking about escapement, that means basically the number of fish that escape beyond the commercial fishery in Bristol Bay and are able to move into fresh water to swim upstream and spawn. And it was about 2.9 million fish this year. That's the third largest on record, since they've been really keeping track since the 1950s. So a lot of fish in the watershed, and especially at Brooks River, because Brooks River receives about 20% of the escapement for the Naknek River watershed as a whole. So there was, several 100,000 sockeye salmon moving through Brooks River this year. Not all of them spawn in Brooks River. Many of them continue through Brooks River. They'll jump the falls. They'll go to Lake Brooks. They'll go to some of those tributaries upstream of Lake Brooks. But many, many fish will stay to spawn in the river like we're looking at right now. You can see a few of those fish, again, have those yellow tails. That's just when they're wearing their skin away by fighting with one another. They bite each other's tails frequently. Again, females are using those tails as a tool to dig their nests. Females especially. I like to show this photo. I've shown this photo several times this September so far, but I'm going to bring this one back up again. Because it does demonstrate the amount of really physical punishment in a sense that they go through to spawn. This is the tail of a spawned out female sockeye. This is a dead one that I found on Brooks River. Pulled it out of the water just for a moment to take a picture of its tail, and you can see how that tail was worn down to almost nothing. How the fin and the rays within that fin are just worn down. So they endure a tremendous amount in order to complete their life cycle. Really just remarkable fish, remarkable creatures. .151 now moving to the lip. Again, that's a place where he's found a lot of success today. Again, probably number 68 in the jacuzzi. Number 503 in the middle part of the falls, hiding back in the shadows, number 32 chunk. And then another young bear that has just appeared here. This could be number 907. Again, that's a tentative ID on this bear, another young subadult that was just emancipated from his mother a couple of years ago. If you're tuning in late to the broadcast, I'd like to welcome you to this Bear Cam play-by-play. My name is Mike Fitz with Explore.org. I'm the resident naturalist with Explore, but I got my start with Explore.org as really the Bear Cam ranger at Katmai National Park. So I was a ranger at Katmai for a number of years. Then Explore.org installed several webcams along the river, and I transitioned into a different job. Instead of talking to people mostly on the river about bears and salmon, I transitioned into more of an online ranger, talking to people about bears and salmon. And I'm really fortunate that after I left my position at Katmai, that Explore has given me this opportunity to continue to share this experience with everybody. So if this is 907 who's hanging out in the shallows closest to the camera here, he, I believe, is a 4.5-year-old bear, the son of number 708, Amelia, who is a bear that has used, who was also raised along the river. So we really do get to see many bears, many generations of bears returning to Brooks River. It's difficult to identify those young subadult bears and match them up with with their family. When we were taking pictures of them, the year before, if they were cubs. You can't always do that. And really the only way to know for sure whether or not, 907 is 708's offspring would be to analyze its DNA. But oftentimes, we can look at their facial features, again, their mannerisms, their coat color, and have a pretty good idea that this is a bear that was raised along the river. So, this is one of the things that really does make watching Bear Cam unique, is that we get to see not only, bears behaving in interesting ways, but we get to see sort of like the progression of these families over time. So 708 was raised along the river by number 468 Reggie. And now 708 Amelia has had a couple of offspring, or a couple of litters of her own, 2 to 3 litters. And now some of those youngest bears are here at the river right now. As we look, continue to look at the falls, You can see the size difference between a mature adult male and a relatively small sub-adult female. This looks like the one near the island is number 610. She is, again, moving out of the frame right now, but number 610 is another bear that has a very unique life story. And each one of these bears is individuals with unique life histories. They all have a different story to tell about how they survive and make a living in the bear world. And one of the things that bears face in the world is hardship and challenge, especially once they're emancipated from their mother, they're separated from their mother, because number 610 was separated from her mother also. We don't know this for sure, but it's been speculated that she was separated from her mother when she was 1.5 years old. She was a very small bear when she was first identified. It clearly looked like a bear just in its second summer. And that's 1 year earlier than most bears are separated from their mother. So she had to find her way in the world on her own. Unlike 503, she didn't get adopted. She was just moving along the river trying to find her way in the world. And evidently she's found success in that. The odds of survival at that age aren't necessarily great. They're better than a young spring cub. Not all, bears that separate from their mothers as 1.5 year olds will die, but the odds of survival are certainly less than if you were to stay with your mother for another year. Although I don't think there's a lot of hard data that I could point to on that. But 610, again, standing downstream of the island, has demonstrated that you can find a way in the world even as a very young bear. And I know my camera feed is a little choppy here and there. I apologize for that. That is just the speed of my computer. We haven't looked down at the mouth of the river very much during the broadcast because there's really been sort of a dearth of bears there. Every year Brooks River is different. One of the things that I would consistently say is something that you can expect to see in September at Brooks River is a lot of bears in the river mouth, in the lower rivers, scavenging for salmon. And on the cams, at least, we're not seeing a whole lot of that so far this year. And that's, again, the cams aren't necessarily representative of everything that happens at the falls, or excuse me, at the river. But we can get a relatively good idea of what is happening. So not a lot of bears using the lower half of the Brooks River right now. And I think that indicates that there's probably just a lot of salmon for them to feed on elsewhere. So whether that's at Brooks Falls, or if it happens to be at other salmon streams that have, maybe their salmon where the salmon spawn was delayed just a little bit this year, or maybe a few weeks, which wouldn't be a little bit for salmon spawning. That's actually a considerable amount of time to be delayed because of the very hot, unprecedentedly hot weather that the area experienced in July. That really heated up the streams where these salmon move in to spawn. So with the return of this chilly, cold weather, this is really great weather for salmon to spawn in. The water temperatures right now are probably in the 50s, so it's easy for the salmon to navigate and save energy with those cooler water temperatures. When the water temperature ends up warming into the upper 60s and especially into the 70s, that starts to tax the fish. Their metabolic rate climbs because they're warmer, and their demand for oxygen increases as well. But when the water becomes warmer, it actually holds less oxygen. So the salmon have to work harder to breathe in those warmer waters than they can when it's cooler. So 151 did find success on the lip, catching and consuming his salmon. The fish that we see spawning downstream of Brooks Falls, again, this view from the riffles, these are fish that have almost certainly chosen this is the right place to spawn for them. So not all salmon feel the urge to swim upstream of Brooks Falls. The vast majority of the ones that are spawning downstream of the falls are fish that were born in this location. So salmon have a very precise homing mechanism that allows them to navigate back to the same streams, same rivers, same places in the streams where they were born. And you can take a look in the water and you can just see that there's fish all over the place. Really just an amazing spectacle. Katmai, the abundance of salmon in particular, and the number of bears that fish on salmon really opened my eyes up to what a healthy, productive ecosystem looks like. So many places in our world are wounded with extinctions. You can think about the west coast of the United States or even New England, where there used to be large runs of Atlantic salmon, and how so few of those fish are left. But at Katmai, it's not that way. This is, again, an ecosystem whose potential is fully realized, which makes it all that much more worth protecting. It's like we might have these two bears interacting with one another. That's something that we haven't seen a whole lot on the cams so far today. And the way, again, the bear on the farther downstream is standing up. That is, again, number 610. I'm not exactly sure who the other bear that was approaching her might be, but that's a fairly typical response by a smaller bear to the approach of a larger bear. Again, the bears are smart animals. They know, hey, I can't really pick this fight and win it, so I'm going to give this other bear space. So most of the interactions that we see at Brooks River between bears are simply just like that. They're just avoidance. So one bear approaches another, and the subordinate bear just understands, hey, this is not a fight that I can win. I'm just going to move away. We have another young bear here, another one of those juvenile bears, those sub-adult bears, catching and eating a sockeye salmon in the riffles here. You can see the first thing that it targets is the brain. The brain is a fatty organ, so it has a lot of calories in it. It's probably not something that people prefer to eat necessarily, but bears love it. We almost never see bears ignore the brain unless they are extremely full. And at this time of the year, bears really don't have that feeling of fullness anyway, since they're going through their hyperphagia process, where the mechanism that tells their bodies that, hey, your stomach is full, stop eating, that is switched off at this time of the year. And you can also see how white the flesh is on this sockeye salmon. That's a really big difference compared to some of the fresher fish that might be still trying to leap Brooks Falls. And of course, a big difference compared to the salmon that you buy in the store, which are bought, salmon are caught in the ocean, generally right before they return to fresh water, and that's when they have the maximum amount of fat within their bodies. So salmon tend to be a fish that's high in fat. One reason why they are preferred so much by bears. But one of the other things that salmon have, of course, when they are fresh from the sea, is a lot of pigments in their flesh. Nice and pink. But these are salmon carcasses that bears picked and left on the shoreline on a day when they were very well fed back in July. You can see how pink that flesh is. And we got a little bit of a look at the salmon that this bear here was eating and how not pink it was, how pale overall it was. When salmon end up spawning, they transfer those pigments from their flesh to their skin and to their eggs. And consequently, their flesh becomes very, very pale towards the end of their life cycle. The texture of the flesh also becomes much, much softer too. It's not nearly as oily. It's a different fish overall compared to the ones that are typically marketed in the grocery stores. I'm not sure if bears mind. I don't know if there's a different flavor for them overall. I think that really what they're looking for isn't necessarily flavor, but more or less how many calories they can get. And maybe the more flavorful, fresher fish, or maybe the fish that are more flavorful are the fresher ones anyway. Quite a few large bears moving around Brooks Falls right now. Number 68 standing up out of the jacuzzi. Number 151 on the lip. I wasn't able to really identify the one that was walking away. But certainly that one did not look like he wanted to challenge 68, who again is one of the largest bears on the river. And you can see how that other bear just sort of turned. Maybe that's number 503. He may have, maybe has circled around since then. 68 often isn't as aggressive towards 503 as other bears. I don't know why. I think bears can certainly learn who tends to be more aggressive, who could be more of a threat physically or for food resources. You can see number 68 approaching that other bear, number 503. 503 continuing to move away. Not running away though, like he is flat out intimidated. 68 approaching in a manner though that's not necessarily aggressive. And this is one of the really sort of wild things that we see sometimes at Brooks Falls. We see bears that some individual bears show a remarkable tolerance for one another, despite not doing that for any other bears. I mentioned before that 503 is a very playful and tolerant bear, but he's a fairly young bear. So that's not necessarily a surprise. Again, he's a young adult, has a lot of energy. But number 68, again, a fully mature adult male, and we don't see them playing very often at that age, but occasionally we'll see number 68 doing that with just 503. And I don't know why. I wish I had an explanation to that. My best guess is, just like our pet dogs can have friends, they have certain dogs that they like to play with, they get along with. Maybe there's relationships between bears like that. The bears are so smart; they're just as smart as any domestic dog. So I think if we can also use domestic dogs as a parallel to understand some of the things that goes on in a bear's brain. And we're seeing right now just a very playful interaction between these two individuals. I think at first 503 was a little unsure about 68's intention. But now he's got the message. They're jawing at one another, but not in a threatening way. So there's no bite threat going on there. That's one of the the ways that bears are when they're in a aggressive interaction between one another. They will often thrust their heads up, mimicking this movement that we're seeing these two bears doing. But this is a playful movement. We don't see, if these bears were being aggressive towards one another, at least one of them would have their ears sort of pinned back on their head, just like a defensive dog does. But play in brown bears does mimic an actual fight. So if you see a real fight between bears, they're not going to last, nearly as long as this. They're generally very short in duration, but it's the same sort of movements, only a lot more violent, a lot quicker. So a lot of cuffing around the head, a lot of biting around the face and neck. That's what they do when they fight. So that's often why, I just end up calling these behaviors just a play fight between these individuals. And this really does happen to show the diversity, I think, of behaviors that individual bears can display. Because if you were around in July watching the bear cams and you saw that fight between number 68, again, who's the larger bear facing us in this view right now. If you saw 68 fight number 747, I mean, that was a real knockdown, drag out, intense fight. And now here, number 68 is being as playful as a bear can be. So wonderful to see. I think this is a good opportunity and a good point to conclude the broadcast. I can continue to encourage you to watch the bear cams the rest of the day. C503 and C68 continue to interact with one another. Take notes of their behavior, because you don't know how those behaviors are going to change as these bears continue to grow and encounter one another in the future. It's one of the things that I love watching about watching bears, is to get to see those changes progress over time and the diversity of the behaviors that these bears display. So an uncommon play fight between two large adult males. What a great way to end the broadcast. Again, my name is Mike Fitz with Explore.org. I'd like to thank the camera operators who helped me out today on the lower river, at the riffles, and watching the bears up at Brooks Falls. We had 3 of them behind the scenes helping us out this afternoon. I'll be back online later this week to host another broadcast. Actually, this Friday is my next live broadcast, Friday, September 20th at 11 a.m. Pacific. Different style of broadcast. I'll be talking about the ecology of Pacific salmon and the consequences that they have and their lives have for the rest of the ecosystem. So I hope you'll join me for that, again, Friday, September 20th at 11 a.m. Pacific, same bear channel. In the meantime, enjoy the rest of your bear cam watching and have a great day.